Is this 1978 Porsche 928 basket case on Bring a Trailer worth taking a chance on, or will you just wind up buying yourself a bucket of paint? Pete Stout from 000 Magazine will join us on the back half of this episode of Bid Nerds. The bidding starts now. Bid Nerds is your daily YouTube car game show, where we predict the online auction results of the most interesting cars on Bring a Trailer, Cars and Bids, Haggerty Marketplace, and more. It's just like the Price is Right game show. Play along and see if you can beat the nerds.
Anthony from Oursmiths submitted to us a 1978 Porsche 928 on Bring a Trailer. JP, pull this car up and take a look at this thing. So this is an interesting car. So this car has been owned
by the way, Anthony never did get back to me and tell me why he suggested this. So we're on our own on this.
Right. Yeah, so I'm going to tease him a little bit about it. So this car has been owned by its current owner for 34 years, and it's a rest of the world example. It's worth noting, JP, that 1978 was the first year of production for the Porsche 928. However, there are some small differences between the ROW, the rest of the world example, and the North American one. Namely, the first thing that comes to mind is the 20 extra horsepower that is under the hood of the European examples. Our car here, as it sits in Chatham, Ontario, Canada, is sitting at 289,000 kilometers, which is about 180,000 miles, and it is a non-running project example. So this is high mileage. The motor failed and has gone undiagnosed. They do not know what the problem is with the motor and why it stopped working about 24 years ago. So the car has been sitting, and while the best of intentions, and I'm sure all of us as car people, car guys and car gals in the chats and on the show, we can all relate to buying a car that we swore we were going to have the energy and the money and the time to fix that we never got around to doing. Well, this guy's been sitting on this car. He's owned it for 34 years, and it broke down on him 24 years ago, and he's never fixed it. So now he's throwing it up, no reserve, on Bring a Trailer, and this car caught Anthony's eyes. So I will just start by saying it would take somebody who works with their hands for a living, like Anthony of Oursmiths, to look at a project car and go, ooh, that's really interesting. Because right now I am buried in an Alfa Romeo Alfetta that I have poured, I'm embarrassed to admit, like $20,000 to $30,000 in, and I still can't drive that car. So I don't have the bandwidth to even look at this and get inspired, despite having that really cool blue-black Porsche interior. 5-speed manual, 4.5-liter V8, rear-wheel drive. This car was in production from 1978 until 1995, but this was the very first itineration of it. The European cars always made a little more horsepower. That Delta was smaller in the early days. It grew a lot until we finally got the GTS on our shores with the full tilt 345 horsepower motor. But this car is a long ways away. And I would contest this, Anthony, and everybody else that's listening, that even if the motor on this car wasn't broken, if it had just, the motor had just been sitting for 24 years, you'd probably still need to open it up and fix it. So I don't understand, unless you're doing the work yourself, JP, like if Tony Mazzagatti bought this car or, Todd bought this car, I just don't understand how like a layperson could buy this car and then start pouring money into it, because values would not justify the expense it would take to get this car cleaned up, mechanically sorted, and back on the road. Plus, if it's not on a non-op, you could be looking at a fortune in registration penalties, So nothing about this car makes sense. And by the way, it's still sitting in Canada. You'd have to bring it into the United States. Anthony, if you're watching, please chime in as to what it was that was the most interesting thing about this car to you, because it's interesting, but it's also interesting in like, who on earth would buy this thing, because the juice isn't worth the squeeze. So JP, I lob it over to you. Perhaps not have done a great job in introducing it or missing the point of it. I love the Porsche interior. I do dig the older 928s, and the European ones always have more power. But this one looks like it's too far away, literally, physically, and financially, to be worth it. Do you see any redeeming qualities here?
This does look like it was pulled right out of the lake 25 years later after Risky business. So Anthony has hopped in here. He's saying that apparently he's tempted to buy his second junk 928. He was gonna buy it and give it to his son. He loves buying junk and junk projects. Well, this is it, my brother. This is definitely junk. You're right about look. Some of the people in the comments are talking about like mechanics won't even work on these anymore. The Porsche, if you're a Porsche independent and you have 3 or 4 lifts and only a couple techs, these Porsche independent shops are having a very hard time finding techs. So if you're an indie shop, you might have 2 or 3 guys working for you. Do you want a rack being taken up to fix a 928, or do you want a rack being taken up to fix a 911? And the problem with these 928s, because they're transaxle cars, almost anything you do to them means that the whole damn powertrain has to come out. Like, the transmission and the driveline and all that stuff, which means you can't wheel the car around. It's got to stay on that lift. And now that lift is dead, and it's an underutilized utility from the shop's point of view. So it's really, really expensive for them to actually accept one of these to do even inexpensive jobs. So a lot of the independent guys are they're charging 2 or 3x on the hourly rate to work on these. And this includes 944s too. So that's something to really think about. You think you're getting a deal. Oh yeah, it's a less expensive Porsche, but bro, it's going to cost you later in the long run. Wade, what do you think of this project basket case?
Yeah, I don't want to completely ish on it, but this is a tough sell for so many reasons. I mean, even if it were a running and driving example in Canada with 289,000 kilometers. I mean, it's not that collector grade, special, nice of an example, even if it were great. So you have to think about, if you're going to put money into it, you're still going to have an almost 200,000 mile car that was in Canada, that if you buy it in Canada and keep it in Canada and you're Canadian, okay, fine. But I can't imagine anyone from the US would be interested in this. And I don't know that I would call this car a project car, because a project car insinuates that some work has been done. And I don't know that this is even a barn find, because it just it's not a very, low mile example of anything. It's not something that's been hidden. It was driven really, really, a lot of miles, and then it just seems to have died because it drove a lot of miles, and they just never fixed it. So I can't possibly imagine who is interested in this, and I can't possibly imagine.
His name is Anthony. What are you talking about?
Well, Anthony,
not only can you imagine him, you can see him in the chat.
It's hard. It's hard to imagine. I'll say that. If it's if all the parts are there and you want to use it as a parts car, or you're gonna LS swap it or something, and you have the labor of love for this car, maybe. But I don't know that many people who this car would be for. And, it's garnering a lot of comments and questions on BAT, which is sort of interesting. Shout out to the guy who either was too dumb to read the listing and said, "Could you please post a driving video?" or did it ironically, whatever the case may be. That one really stood out. But it's weird. And at the end of the day, I don't even know if this car, if it were running and driving, it would be more than a $15,000 car. So how much money could you dump into this to even make it run and feel good? I would almost just say turn it into something else. LS swap it, make it ridiculous, make it this crazy wild thing, and just start over. But I guess we'll see. Very, very weird. Very weird.
Very peculiar. All right. Well, so what's a basket case worth on BAT? We talked about on the other side of the break how cars that that Land Rover, the Range Sport there, that should be a $6,000 or $7,000 car on Facebook Marketplace, and it brought 12 on BAT. Is this the kind of bucket that should only bring a couple of grand on Marketplace, but on here it's going to bring a lot more? Michael Deeb, what do you think it's going to bring?
I just don't. So here's the thing. I don't even understand how you could open up that motor to try and fix it. Cause if you just took the motor apart, just took the top end off or resealed it just to clean it out and get it running again, because it's been sitting for 24 years, you'd already be buried in the value of the car, because fair condition for these cars is $14,000. Good condition is $39,000. This car, even if it's running, is barely fair condition because of the super high miles, the wavy bodywork, and although it's got beautiful Porsche interior, it's starting to split in some of the corners on the driver's seat. So I think if Anthony and his son decide to buy this car as a project, I would assume their route to getting this running would be to find a 928 motor that is operational, buy that, and just swap the blocks and drop the an operational 928 motor in there, and they could probably do that for closer to $10,000 and not be totally buried in the car. JP, our car closes tomorrow. It's sitting at currently $3,100, and that's just on 5 bids. I don't think this thing makes $8,000. I'm oh my God, I'm going to give you 6,500, and yeah, I think that's it. $6,500.
You were saying that Anthony should have if he has an engine, or okay, did you give us a number?
Yeah.
Okay, so if he has an engine, and he's texting me, he's actually saying that he does. He's got, in fact, it sounds like it might be so he's got a 4.7 twin distributor, 315 horsepower motor from an 84 Euro.
Yeah.
So okay, great. That
sense.
definitely makes more sense. You have the engine ready to go in it, so you're not trying to salvage this particular engine. That just seems like a fool's errand here. I have a basic formula for buying used cars, right? It's a 3-part formula. It's very simple. I'm a simple person. I'm poor at math. I'm not very smart. I'm not very quick on my feet. So when I'm presented with something like, okay, are you or are you not going to buy this old classic car? The 3 factors are: 1, the mechanical condition; 2, the aesthetic condition, which is, body, paint, interior, all that kind of stuff. Mechanical is obviously the engine, the powertrain, the brakes, all that kind of stuff. And then the third one is value, is the price, right? You have to have 2 out of 3. You can't have just one that's really good and the other 2 are terrible. You have to have 2 out of 3. So it has to be mechanically sound and a really good price, but needs, aesthetics fixed. Maybe it needs body work, or maybe it needs cleaning or something like that. Or maybe it looks great and drives great, but the price isn't so good. So it's got to have 2 out of 3 to make it worthwhile. This car does not seem like there's any chance that could be even 1 out of 3. Mechanically, it's obviously worthless. Aesthetically, holy crap. I mean, give me a break, right? And then the value, it's all, what is it going, where's it at right now, Deeb, on the auction?
That $3,100.
Yeah, I wouldn't pay $3,100 for it at all. There's no way, I wouldn't pay $1,000 for this. I wouldn't even take this car if they offered to ship it to me for free, because this thing is actually literally a cost center. This car is a radioactive, I cite the Ugnaughts from the show Aqua Teen Hunger Force, right? They thought they stole a check, but they stole a bill. This thing is radioactive. Once it comes into your world, it is going to suck life away from you. Run away from this thing. Find one that looks great, but is mechanically crappy and is also a good price. That's the only way this formula works out for you, Anthony. So you're saying it's at $3,000 right now?
3,100. Where are you at,
3,100. I'll go 39,928 just because whatever. Please don't buy this car, Anthony. You won't be able to afford to come down and see us at Air and Water because you will be broke after this thing. What do you think, Wade?
Yeah. So first off, I think I love your checklist. And I would say from my own perspective, the big question is this car worth saving as a car? Is this a nice example of what this is? And arguably it's just not. So, you kind of have to think about the fact that if you put the time and money to make this car right, it's really not that valuable or interesting. If you put the time and money to make this car something totally new, you're never going to get any of that money back. And maybe if you just love turning cars into something else, it's just kind of your hobby, that's fine. I would agree that there's probably no reason to buy or save this car. And with that being said, especially being in Canada with everything else, I don't see it getting any more bids. Maybe if Anthony throws in another $100 or $200, I'll say $3,300, and he, maybe if he's serious, that's about it. But for 3,300 Canadian rupees, I can't possibly imagine why you would get this car and what you would do with it, other than maybe some of the parts are worth something, but I mean, are the parts alone, like the body work, the
amount of time it would take to strip this thing down and catalog it and
could you
ship
make
all this?
could you
no
make
way.
$5,000
No
anywhere?
way.
Anywhere on this
Nothing
car?
is good in it. The only thing that might be good is the glass. And glass is a pain in the ass to remove. He said, so Anthony's saying right there, he's like, he's out at $4,700. He says that the transaxle is worth more than that for the swap. Okay. Yeah, I guess. Yeah, I think the only way restoring this car would make any sense to anyone would be if you found out that it was your dad's car. And after he passed away, you're sitting there. My dad had a silver 928 when I was a kid, and he passed years ago. And I'd love to have something that would, remind. And you do a VIN search, and you're like, oh my god, that was his car. That's the only way you buy something like this that's totally worthless in all three vectors. So yeah, Anthony, good luck, brother. We are all rooting for you and hoping that someone outbids you. Please, God, someone outbid you. All right, what do you guys think this car will bring? Let us know in the comments below. Hey, guys, I got to tell you about our friends Godden Porsche of Las Vegas and Godden Classic. If you're looking for a new Porsche or a classic, you got to call our friend Steve at Godden, this guy.
1989 linen gray metallic G50 cab.
Is that going to be for sale?
It is going to be for sale. The car only has 65,000 miles.
Save yourself the hassle of screwing around with all the auctions like we always talk about, and just talk to Steve. He'll find you the classic Porsche you're looking for. Godden Porsche of Las Vegas. Hey guys, you're probably looking at your watch and wondering if Bid Nerds will ever end. So you better talk to our friends at Our Smiths to make sure your Rolex, Tag Heuer, AP, or any fine timepiece is in tip-top shape. Our Smiths, fine Swiss repair.
Several days later.
All right, so Anthony from Our Smiths selected and submitted for us this 1978 Porsche 928. This is a car that has been owned by its current custodian for the last 34 years. It's a rest of the world example. So 78 being the first year of the 928, the North American cars made about 20 horsepower less. This is the European or the rest of the world example. Our car is on Bring a Trailer and located in Chatham, Ontario, Canada, showing 289,000 kilometers, which is about 180,000 miles on the odometer. The motor is non-running. The motor failed 24 years ago, and this car has been sitting for the last 2.5 decades. The owner has decided to give up on this project. They pushed it into the sunlight, took some photos of it, slapped it on BAT, and Anthony thought this might be a cool car for us to examine. And I struggle to see the merit left in this car because it's a non-running project and it's not even on the ground in the United States. And it's super high mileage to begin with. Now, don't get me wrong. It is the first year of the 928. This car did come with the dark blue and white Porsche interior. So there are some cool factors here, but you got to wonder by the time you import it, by the time you get the motor running, by the time you give the rest of this car some love, is there any equity in it? Is the juice worth the squeeze? With that in mind, I started the bidding at $6,500, and I found myself as being alone at the top. JP came in at $3,000. Wait for it, $928. And Wade, who was with us in studio on Sunday, came in underneath JP at just $3,300. It's worth noting that Anthony, who submitted the car to us, didn't even bid as high as I would. He said he would look at the car, but likely be done with it once it got into the $4,000 range. So, Pete, we're going to throw you into the fire without knowing anything else about this car, but knowing that it's non-running in Canada on BAT, no reserve. I bid high at $6,500. Wade bid low at $3,300. Where do you think the hammer fell on this poor, in need of a lot of attention, and lonely and cold in Canada 928, first year 928? Where do you think the hammer fell on that car?
Well, I gotta love you for this, Michael Deeb, because people ask me, and I am the last person for values.
Yeah.
I'm focused on the driving and the fun of things.
Right.
The dollars usually chase me away. So I'm going to go ahead and also I will say, I bought a car like this. I had a 928 that I bought for $600 that had been abandoned as a project. And I couldn't.
What year was that?
was an 83 or 84 competition package, and I just couldn't, it was going to get parted out. And so I bought it to try to save it and turn it into an off-road or like a fire road exploration vehicle. I paid $600, but I also know we're talking about bring a trailer. So I'm going, I'll 9X it for $4,500.
4,500. That's not a bad guess.
Deeb, before you let him like land on that number, do you remember where it was when we made our prediction?
It was below $3,000.
It was below $3,000.
Yeah, because Wade bid $3,300, so it was at like $2,900 or $3,000 even. And Wade, I think it was at like $3,100, and Wade gave it like $200 more at $3,300.
Gotcha. All right. So, well, let us know what happened with this thing.
So much to my chagrin, because I thought when everybody gave their bids and we got the bids from the herd, Pete, all the bids came in around $3,000-$4,000, and I was up there at $6,500. I thought, man, I'm probably going to look stupid about this one, except that it was running no reserve, and somebody had to have it. The hammer fell at $9,100 where it sold on 27 bids. So, JP, my knee-jerk reaction to this is the person who bought it didn't notice it was in Canada, because you still have to import this thing, and by the time you pay the transport and the tariffs, and then start to undress this thing and put it back together correctly, I just think you're going to be buried in it. I don't know that there's anything left in this car. Even if you just were happy driving a ratty 928 and you just wanted to get it mechanically sorted, I still think you're underwater in this car. JP, your thoughts? $9,100 for a non-running 928 with like nearly 300,000 kilometers sitting in Ontario, Canada. What is going on?
Now, I got to pass this on to our guest here really quick. But you said that the person didn't realize it was in Canada. Like, no. The person thought it was in Canadian dollars or Canadian maple dollars or monopoly money. Pete Stout, what do you think of this result? What is going on?
It's got to be a bring a trailer result. I mean, what I will say is you start to say, okay, is there a counter logic here where the car's been off the road for 24 years against other 928s that have been on the road for 24 years. So whatever life it lived up to that point froze at that point. And it's tempting to say, oh, that's back in the 90s. Maybe it's a good car. But no, that's the year 2000. And if you start to look at this car, you wonder what was its life from 78 to 2000. I happen to really love the early 928s. I guess I'm an odd one out. I really dig the 2-valve cars, and the lighter and simpler the better. Mm-hmm. But yeah, $9,000. I mean, looking at these pictures, I can easily envision spending $90,000 to get this car up to a high standard. And who's going to do that? I mean, at this time, who is going to do that? What was the mileage on the chassis?
Known. It was, here we go. 289,000 kilometers, which is about 179,000 miles.
I can't see paying. As somebody who bought a 928 that was non-running for $600, and wasn't that many. It wasn't 24 years ago. It was like 10 years ago. I'm having a tough time. And I got all my money back out when it came to. My wife was delighted when I lost the half hanger that it was sitting in. So I think I sold it for $600 too. So that's a tough one at $9,000. I mean, I think getting it running, realistically, you're talking about, even if you're doing all the work, 10 to 20, and probably a lot more.
Probably it's been sitting for 2.5 decades, and the motor blew up when it let go. So you've got an engine rebuild, and then your brakes and you got to redo the entire brake system. All your rubber bushings and everything. The suspension's probably shot. The tires are flat spotted. I mean, don't get me started. This car needs everything, Pete.
And none of you guys have mentioned the electricals on this thing. I mean, how many mice and gerbils and whatever critters have gotten into this thing? I mean, mammoths, whatever they have crawling around in Canada. I mean, the wiring loom alone on this thing has got to be $10,000 if you can even find one. Our friend Anthony.
Have you guys ever opened up? Have you guys opened up the circuit board on a 928 in the passenger footwell?
No.
You're inexperienced. That's surprising. I figure you guys would be ahead of me on that one.
Pete, this is a family show. We're not trying to scare the kids. What are you doing talking about doing that? Oh my gosh, that sounds terrifying.
I worked with a certain ad director at Excellence Magazine for about 15 years, and he asked me to. He figured out that I was doing car stereo badly in high school, and he asked me to install a stereo in his 920 S4, and I said, okay, sure. And I took it home, and if you get the passenger footwell carpeting down, there's this, like, you're confronted with this Rocky and Bullwinkle. It's huge. It's this huge fuse panel / relay board. And in the middle of it, there's just this little box with a little red LED, and it says test. And you can plug in things to see if they're good. And I thought, if you've got an onboard testing facility for things, that is a bad sign.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you know, but one of the weak points of those cars is that when the windshield seals fail, all the water goes down to where the passenger footwell, where that board is located. So those cars are not for the faint of heart.
No,
I do love them, but one that's been dead for nearly a quarter of a century.
Yeah.
Pass.
It was driven hard, put away wet, as they say. And, everybody keeps saying in the comments here that, they're going parts. It's like, the parts were all worn out when this thing died 20 years ago. What do you think you're going to pull off of this thing that's any good? And the amount of labor and effort it would take to get whatever part out of this thing that you think is going to, somehow recover your investment on this. This just seems bonkers to me.
There's a lot of unknowns in that car. And I think Deeb said it well when you're doing everything, all the hoses, master cylinder, it's a total recommission. And then there's whatever sidelined it. It said the engine's bad.
Yeah. Engine gave out and they parked it. That was it. So it didn't run when parked, and parked was 24 years ago. And it's in Canada.
And by the way, so the co-founder of 000 bought an early 928 and still has it, loves it. He was kind of ahead of the curve on it. 79, a great car. But when he got it, the cylinder heads had to be completely rebuilt due to something none of us really think about. The aluminum heads had corroded from sitting. So they had to be welded up and polished and cleaned. And so what do you think these heads are looking like? Because they haven't had coolant through them in how long?
Yeah. Oh, man.
Pete, I have an equation that I use when I'm kind of like trying to decide whether or not I should buy an old car. And I talked about it in the last episode, but since you're here, I'd love to get your opinion on this. I feel like there's three vectors that you got to kind of look at. One, you've got the aesthetics, obviously. Then two, you've got the mechanical side of the vehicle. And then three is the value, right? So your equation winds up being this thing. You've got these three main things that you got to look at. And I think if you're going to say yes to a car, you have to have at least two out of those three. And this car, to me, has 000. Like all the zeros. It's all zeros all the time. I put that together right when I was saying it. I can't believe how clever I am. What do you think of that?
I've never thought about that. From that perspective, I never thought about 000 as a car to run from. But in this case, I'm going to give it a 1. Like, the visuals are good. Silver early car, Porsche stick
phone
is
dials.
a desirable car. And what I would say is, for someone with a much longer window than mine, and I'm not that old, I don't know what that window is. But is this the current 65 or 66 911 of 20 or 30 or 40 years ago? Maybe you grab it and tickle it because it is a first year 928. And I don't know if you've driven a first year 928. I did many years ago, and I was blown away by how fun it was to drive, how great it sounded. Like those early 928s are really special in my book. And it has a really interesting moment in Porsche history, that car, and what could have been, as well as what it was, which was, remember, that 78 928 won European Car of the Year from all of the various motoring publications. And when I drove an early one, I realized why. Those stick shift early 928s are fabulous to drive. And at some point, are those going to be six-figure cars? At what point? And so I guess there's a lot of question marks around this one. But there is something to be said for a car that ended up getting parked. Now, look, this one's mileage is big and the needs are big. So there's some people who buy these cars up and they get to work slowly, but they know that the values would catch up.
Well, someone bet that you're right and bet big, because they bet
Maybe.
the farm on it at $9,000 plus. Our good friend Anthony Vieira, owner of Our Smiths, he is in the chat. Pete, we have what we call the nerd herd over here. We got all the folks who are hanging out watching us live, and there's a bunch of them tonight. Everyone, I think, is here to see you, probably not us.
Yeah.
They're pretty sick of us.
Doubtful.
Yeah, I think here's the thing. You're, as the publisher of a magazine, you're a journalist. I want to say maybe, do you have some investigative journalism in your history? Can you maybe launch an investigation and find out what the hell this person was actually thinking, who this person that spent $9,000 on this car was? Do you like a...
Yeah, it could have been if I were still at Panorama or Excellence, it would probably be pretty interesting to get into the psychology of it. I see Anthony, commenting on some of the parts and in a couple places. And there may be, again, never underestimate the specialists or the niche markets within Porsche or elsewhere. Yeah. When Alex got his 928 and got the bad news about the cylinder heads, which was not a small cost, and the car was, he was ahead of the market, but it was still really expensive at the time, that car. It was a really good silver early car with Pasha and a 5-speed like this car. And he's, okay, I won the auction. I think it was eBay. And, did I pay too much? And I was like, how much did you pay? And, well, you're going to keep it, probably be all right. And then the cylinder head thing came down. But Greg Brown, who's one of the two best known experts on these cars at the time, looked over the car, and he said, there's this part and this part and this part and this part on the bottom of this car that's perfect, and you cannot get them. So if that's Greg Brown, one of the two best specialists on these cars, saying there's all these parts that you got in this auction with this car that I can't replace, and he can't replace them. Maybe somebody who's quite savvy saw that this car had a lot. So what Anthony's getting at might be spot on. There might be somebody who's saying that car's worth it for the parts. There's a bunch of things that I can get on that car. Maybe they looked through all the photos and said, I can make up the $9,000 with that, and it comes in one package.
Yeah, there you go.
For sure. All right, what do you guys think of the results of this Porsche 928? Needed a lot of love. Is this a gold mine in silver, or is this just a bucket of sorrow? Let us know in the comments below. Hey guys, thanks for watching this clip of the Bid Nerds podcast. Play along with us live every Sunday and Wednesday night at 6:30 p.m. on YouTube, and see if your bids stack up to the rest of the nerd herd in the chat live. Thanks for hanging out, and we'll see you on the next episode.
Get those words!